I don't feel so good. And am I supposed to tell everybody that is this the first incident? Okay. Don't talk about it. Just see what we get. Oh boy, it's really close.
He doesn't have a hearing aid. He doesn't know what it means.
I was going to say I'm the only non-engineer here probably. We were with Marino with the medical division back in Quito in the 70s. But I just wanted to say what a meaningful time this has been for us. Just to see some of you who we've known for decades, and the names some of them I hadn't remembered for a while. But this has been a special couple of days for us to see what God has done through many ways, not just through medicine, but through engineering, and not just by direct evangelism, but by what you've done throughout the world. I was in tears for a little while when I heard what God was doing this morning. I just want you to know how much we appreciate you and love you, even if I'm just a doctor. Thank you.
This has been a very emotional time for me. I hope I can help to tell the story. When Lou passed away in January at the funeral, I was talking to my grandson's wife, and we were talking about HCJB. When I was night manager at the station, I used to listen to the various programs to make sure they were going out forward and not backward. And this one evening I was listening to the Romanian broadcast, and it didn't sound right. It just didn't sound right. And you know, there were full track machines, and I had a half track at home. So I went to the operator right afterwards, and I said, let me have that tape. He did. I took it home and I put it on my half track machine. And what I discovered was it was recorded in one direction as well as the other direction. And so when it went on the full track machine, it took everything. And of course you couldn't comprehend anything. So I told the discoteca right away, and they re-recorded the programs. And they sent word up to Chicago to the Romanian people to please bulk erase the tape before you record again. And I was telling my grandson's wife this, and she said, that was my mother. She was recording the programs. So there's the difference between the 70, 72 or something like that, and just this year to find out something like that, how the Lord worked it all together. It's beautiful.
Well, I had Herb. How about you last two guys? Anything you want to say? No? Okay. All right.
Unless people want to hear how things are in Quito now.
Why don't you tell us about what it's like to be the only engineer on the face of the earth on the equator line?
Well, I'm sure there's more engineers on the equator line than me. I came to Ecuador in '77 as a summer missionary, and I worked with you. And then I came back to Quito a couple times. I was a student at RIT, and they had a co-op program, so I spent my co-ops down in Ecuador, and that met part of my educational requirements. And then I met Elaine there, and we got engaged on the Panacillo, and Well, actually, I asked her on the Panacea when she had to think about it for a while. But I'm quite happy that that happened there. And then we came back full-time in 1984, and my vision was to reach out to countries behind the Iron Curtain, behind the bamboo curtain, and that was 1984. So how long was it until the Berlin Wall fell? Like 4 or 5 years. But it's still worthwhile to hang on and continue ministering, even if it's not with the original vision. And we still kept up Russian broadcasts for another 15 years or so. What did I come up here to talk about? I'll just tell you where things are like now in Quito. We sold the PIFO property in 2009. We went off the air in 2009 from PIFO because of the airport which was coming in, which began operation in 2013. So maybe we were a bit premature in moving out, but the technology changes and everything. It's time to upgrade ourselves. So we saved one shortwave transmitter and put it on the air up on Pichincha on 49 meters, 6,050 kilohertz. And that transmitter was up there until, well, it's still there, but it was in operation until December or January of this year, February, when we replaced it with a TV1000 from here. And the 1,000 watts from the TV1000 sounds better than the 3,000 watts from the other transmitter. So that's the status of things with shortwave. About a year and a half ago, we recently shut off our AM at the end of the year. So we're not on AM 690 kilohertz anymore, which that had been on since the 70s, the 60s, at least from Pichincha since the 70s. But we just couldn't pay the power bill anymore because HCJB, the radio station, went independent from Reach Beyond the Mission. So I'm actually on loan to HCJB. So I still think of myself as being with the mission HCJB. It takes a few years for name changes to go through my head. So I feel like I'm on loan from HCJB to HCJB. But that seems to be working out well, because it was certainly time that HCJB be an Ecuadorian entity, which it is now. So with 3 other missionaries, George, Jeff Koistra, Matt Parker, Betty Van Engen, who was doing counseling, where the rest of HCJB is Latinized. So and that's a good step. We shut off ALAS, I think at the end of 2014. But ministry continues with distributing programs by internet, because that's somewhat cheaper. And that's working out to be worthwhile as well. So all of these events, the shutting down of ALAS, I was there to shut it off. Turning off the AM, I was there. I at least told the computer program, don't turn that thing back on again. With PIFO, I was there to tell the computer, don't turn those transmitters back on again. We recently, I worked with Harry Chase back in the 90s to refurbish our microwave system And come January this year, we shut that off. So it's just, I've been at HCJB now for 33 years full-time. And it's just interesting to see stuff I put a lot of sweat into now be turned off and yanked out of the rack and sent off to scrap. But they have fulfilled their goal. They were used for decades in the Word of God going out. So it's just part of the process. Because I need to be in love with the message that we're sending. The means come and go. But the important thing is the message keeps going.
Yeah, the delivery systems have changed, but the message is still the same. That's right. I think we might, no, let's see. I didn't include those very last tables. Any of you ladies like to say anything? No, shaking hands. Oh, you did yours. Okay, how about table number 3 here? Please.
Well, I'm keeping John Dorfer company. He's a doctor and I'm a musician. I walked in last night and one of our missionaries we've known for quite a while said, "What are you doing here?" I haven't seen this missionary for quite a number of years, so it was a great greeting. But anyhow, no, Sheila and I went to HCJB in 1981, served in Ecuador. I've served in Canada as Canadian director. And it's interesting too, because Jim Childs just shared the instrument that I play, which is a synthesized accordion. I remember having trouble with it just before our first furlough. And I wasn't sure what to do about it. There was something wrong with the organ part of what we call the 8 flutes on the organ. And I think Jim remembers this, but I actually went to engineering and I talked to Jim Childs, and Jim said, one of my projects one day when he was a young man, still a young man, was to build an organ. I did not know that about Jim. He built his own organ. So he took my instrument and worked on it, and he came back with a part. And of course he said, I apologize for this part because it's quite a bit bigger than the part that actually goes in your instrument. But if you put this together with that together and plug it in, he said that should be the problem, solve the problem, and it was a filter. And I still have that to this day, Jim. I'll bury it with you if you want. That's an incredible memory of Jim. And actually, another couple that's not here is Alan Renault is not here. I had another problem several years later when Alan was in Quito. And Alan asked me, he said, do you have the schematics? And I said, yes. He said, give it to me. I had one note that wouldn't even play electronically any longer. Alan took a look at that and he fixed it. Engineers are great guys. Great guys, they're problem solvers. Well, it's our privilege to be here. We still live in Canada. Sheila and I retired from Reach Beyond the end of 2015. And we were here for the inauguration of SonSet Solutions a couple of years ago. And that was an exciting time for us. And the Lord just led me to set up a meeting to talk to David Russell and a few of the upper management. And I mentioned to them, I said, you know, what would be really neat is if you had a SonSet Solutions Canada. Just like we have reach beyond Canada, and said we could raise funds, support projects, and so forth. So I'm on the board of SonSet Solutions here as well. And last April of 16, we received our incorporation papers for SonSet Solutions Canada. And then later on, we applied for the charity status. We had a few bumps in the road with that, working with a lawyer. Of course, I've had a lot of experience with charities on the admin end. And I'd ask you to pray, please, that the Canada Revenue Agency, which has decided they do not want to give any more charitable status to any religious organizations in Canada. Canada's gone extremely liberal. They don't want anything to do with religion. However, they still have the old laws in place, so they legally really can't deny giving us a status. However, they can make it kind of miserable for you. So we've been going through this miserable time for the last several months. But you know, we just say if God wants it, God's going to give it. And I see a few other things that are happening on the mission scene lately that we are concerned about. And who knows, maybe God's going to use SonSet Solutions to come alongside and help some other missionaries out as well. So please pray that this charity status will come through soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, still on this table, any folks, any more? Anybody else like to share something with us, please? Please, please. Thank you.
I'd like to help you out of tight spots, Jim. I said I'd like to help you out of tight spots. A lot of you know me, but we served in Ecuador from 1978 until 83, and then went back to Canada for to get the kids in school, basically. And during that time, I started a two-way radio business and was continuing to try to find out how I could be involved in missions and stay based in Canada. And eventually I got tied in with Mission Aviation Fellowship in Canada. That project was, they had a friend of mine had sold two-way radios to MAF, or got them down there somehow to MAF Shell. And they said, how would you like to go down and help install that equipment? And so I said, sure. And I went down and found out that they needed some licensing to license those frequencies in Ecuador. And so Jim and his, what should I say, hospitality provided me space at HCJB, and for the time I was there, for about six weeks, I worked in Quito, doing the maps and all of the things that needed to be done to apply for the radio license. And I should add, I learned how to do that because my first job after college was working for the Canadian government as a radio inspector, doing those precise things of doing the topographical maps and all of the coordinates and the rest of it. And then that summer, we went back for, 6 weeks to help install radios in the aircraft in Shell, and to put together 2 repeater stations, which were put on one mountain up close, just above Shell, and the other one out in the jungle above Macas. And so that provided VHF communications throughout the jungle for MAF, which was a lot superior to the single sideband radios that they had been using. And so I served with MAF for 7 years, and what they said was, Well, we've got projects all over the world with our various programs that we need somebody to go out for up to 6 weeks at a time to work on their shortwave radios or anything else that needed servicing. And so I enjoyed doing that. One of the projects was to go to Angola and supply radios to for distributing around the country, because Angola was going to come up with going to have elections, and they needed the UN needed this coverage to look after the elections that were going to be done. And so, of course, when you're in a country that you kind of like to find out, especially technicians, we like to find out how things, specific things are called. And so when I was there, I said to this helper, I said, well, you know, in English this is called a drill, and in Spanish a taladro. What do you call it here in Angola? And he said, oh, here in Angola we call it a Black & Decker. So I enjoyed doing that until, as Dave was saying, I got tired and burned out from all the flying around. But my language of going into Latin America and into Africa, it really, especially into Latin America, helped with knowing the language and being able to travel. I resigned from an MAF and went back into two-way radios, of course, working for another company until maybe 3 or 4 years later, I get a call from Alan McGuirl with Galcom International. And Alan calls up and he says, well, you know, we have these little radio receivers that we give out all over the world, but we have so many villages that say, you have these radio receivers, but we need a low power transmitter, and so we need somebody to go out and install low power transmitters. And so I got involved with Galcom doing exactly that. And I was thinking this morning when they were sharing of how many transmitters have gone out of here to various countries, and I'm sure that with Galcom I managed to load up suitcases with taking the dipole antennas apart and putting the L pieces around the outside of the suitcase and putting the transmitter in the middle of it and taking them into third world countries and installing them. So probably someplace between 10 or 20 FM transmitters went out of here with the help of the engineering center to supply the transmitters and the antennas. And so there were numerous stations around the world that got added to the number that that are being put in every day. And so I did that for again about another 6 years, and then burned myself out. Took some time to relax. And then in looking for a job, one of the projects that I had was working, because of Galcom, working with 4VEH in Haiti. And so they had a transmitter called an Omnitronics transmitter. And an engineer who had worked with Galcom previously was then working at Omnitronics and got me in there to be trained on the Omnitronics transmitter. And so because of that training, I started going out and fixing Omnitronics transmitters, because Omnitronics didn't have engineers they could send out to the field. And so one of these was I got to go to a station in Detroit, WLQV. And while I'm there, I find out that I'm trying to fix this Omnitronics transmitter because the owner wanted to sell it, and they wanted to sell it to Salem Broadcasting. And so 2 of the gentlemen from Salem Broadcasting come in, I meet him, and we got talking about HCJB and the time I'd spent in Quito. And they went out and did their due diligence around the place. It's a 50,000 watt station with 9 towers. And he comes back in and he says, how would you like to be responsible for rebuilding this station? And I said, sure. So I spent a year there, and we redid everything except the 9 towers and the transmitter. The antenna tuners, the phasers, the cables, everything was replaced. So it took us about a whole year to do that. And then they had a flood, one of these nor'easters and a heavy rain in Hackensack, New Jersey, which flooded out the transmitter and the antenna tuners. And so what we did was we went in and took a 40-foot trailer and mounted the new equipment, new phaser, and built new antenna tuning units up above the 100-year flood level, and did that, and then went to Miami and duplexed the radio station there, which took another number of time, putting in new, and because it was duplexed, we had to put in new antenna tuning units for both frequencies, new cables, and this was out in the middle of the Everglades, which was really nice. And then later on back to Hackensack when the new building got made up above the flood level, and moved all of that equipment out of the trailer back into the new transmitter building. And that's about the time that the financial world went, and Salem Communications ran out of money, and so they weren't refurbishing any of their stations anymore, so that kind of pretty well retired me in doing the things that I was doing. And so I'm retired, but I work part-time at a hardware store. Having a lot of fun doing that. Thanks for allowing me to share.
Anyone else in that room? What are you saying? What are you doing? You want to come, Larry? Oh, thank you. Okay.
I'm part of the non-engineering people, but I spent a good part of my early years at HCJB taking all the pictures of towers and people building towers and video so that you could raise funds for that. And finally, I was freed from Dick Broach and the darkroom by 3 men who, unbeknownst to me, that day wrote down my name on a piece of paper and turned it over. And all 3 of them had Larry Buckman as the person to be the construction person at Papiacta. And I had just come from a meeting with Dick where I had told him I was sorry for all the things I had said and asked his forgiveness and said, if you want me to live the rest of my life in that darkroom, I'll do it. And then when Eric met me on the sidewalk coming down from Dick's office, remember he was on the 2nd floor, he said, we're thinking we want you to do this with us. And I said, I can't turn around and go back and tell Dick that because I just told him I'd spend the rest of my life in a dark room. And so I said, you guys got to do it. So Sam Rowley and Eric and, oh boy, the third one, he was the chief engineer then, chief of broadcasting. They went over and said to Dick, we want Larry to come for 6 weeks. Well, as you all know, we were there. 6 weeks turned into 3.5 years. And as I was telling Bruce Redback, I said, you were the brains there, I was the brawn. I just, lived with the men and brought Faye out, and she fed everybody that came down. We had all those work teams coming one right after the other. And every time I see pictures of me on that bulldozer, I think, I never thought I'd get over the hemorrhoids from Maggie. Every time I say I hemorrhoids, ad on TV. I said, yeah, I know what that's like. But anyway, Earl Hartwig is part of that team, and of course now he's in New Guinea, just put in a power plant for a hospital and building the buildings and more hospital. And when I was overseeing Eric with Faye not too long ago, he said, can you go to Africa and work with us in Africa to set up another hydro plant? And I said, that window's passed, brother. I'm so sorry. But the window that has opened to me was the one that Ron Klein planted in my heart when he took me to Russia, in the Ukraine, no, to Uzbekistan, Georgia. And I was videotaping. I mean, now you see with a little camera, tripod. And I had to carry everything in 2 suitcases. And he said, you got to carry your own weight because everybody's carrying these portable studios to set up in these countries so they can start producing programming for radio. And that's when the Lord began to say to me, and I said, yeah, but when's that going to happen? And went back to Ecuador, and then began working with the Soma to build their television station, which was wonderful because it was my dream come true to cover the majority of Ecuador with gospel in television. And then wondered what we were going to do next, and then Samaritan's Purse called me up, and I said, how did they even get my name? Well, they did through HCJB, and we were off to Honduras to direct the rebuilding of about 5,000 homes after Hurricane Mitch. And I no sooner got there than I realized that I was working with Christians who were evangelizing, and I said, we got to organize evangelists here. We got to get the Jesus film in here. We got to get, all this stuff in here. We got to lead people to Christ. And what I did was I took everything I'd learned for 20 years at HCJB. And if you know anything about Franklin Graham, he has millions of dollars. He's not like our people go around beating on every door. Can you give us $1, And so when he gets millions, he wants you to produce like you got millions. So I asked for vehicles for 12 young evangelists that I taught. And they went out 2 by 2, and in a matter of 8 months, they led 32,000 people to Christ. The next thing I knew was we got to train lay pastors to build churches, because I learned that at HCJB, working on the medical brigades. Everything I did from leaving Ecuador till now, I learned at HCJB. And so we did. And then when I finished my contract for building houses, Franklin said, I want you to stay for 3 more months and just work with pastors. So that's when I called a medical surveyor. I said, okay, where do you get your Bibles from, your study Bibles and your basic library for pastors, because I need that here. So he told me, and in the process of doing this pastoral training, he called me and said, would you consider returning to HCJB, because we had resigned to work with the Soma. And I said, well, if you need me, I'll return. So he said, yeah, we need you. So I returned. Of course, that led to a whole bunch of questions like, why'd you resign? Why'd you come back? Those kind of things. If you've dealt with Dick Rhodes, those are nothing to deal with. Dick was a wonderful father to me. But anyway, we came back with HCJB, and we were leaving Honduras, and he said, well, we've decided we don't want you to leave Honduras. We want you to work with the Mosquito Indians in Honduras, because they're begging for someone to come and teach them. So for the next 4 years, I spent working with mostly Moravian churches, Baptists, and Assembly of God in the Mosquitia, and uniting those churches to be one body in Christ. And then I met up with Miami International Seminary and went to Brazil with them to start working among the tribes and starting centers, training centers, which was what Corrientes wanted to do. And when they finally came down and looked at what I was doing, they said, this is exactly what we want you to do. And it's been wonderful to see that progress. But then in the last couple of years, since we came back to the States, Faye had AFib, and so we decided it was time to get serious about checking in with doctors, and now they tell me I got it too. So it's not a disease, by the way, it's small failures. But anyway, got back with Mintz, and they said, we have so many requests around the world, would you please go and open up centers? And I said, wow. I speak English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And they sent me to Portugal and Spain. The next thing I know, I'm going to Morocco. I don't speak Arabic. The next thing I know, I'm going to Guinea-Bissau and Gambia. And then they said, well, there's a request in China. Could you go to China? And then next thing I know, I was going to Mongolia. And all the time I was saying, remember Ron Klein when he took you around and showed you the world? And you keep saying, well, I'm not man enough for that. I'm too old for that. Now my legs are giving out. You know, you begin to think of all those things that are going wrong with you, and they're distractions. But thank the Lord, he just calls us to follow him a step at a time and to go where he takes us. I'm going to have a hip operation in a couple of weeks, and I'm hoping that I'll be fit and fiddle to take off, because we got a big tour going to see the jungle Indians of the Amazon who are ready to evangelize their old tribes. And we're talking about whole villages, 1,000 people coming to Christ at one time. And then they say a year later, can you come in and teach us how to be missionaries? This is happening all over the world, folks. It's not something that we just put up in prayer letters. The Spirit of the Lord is moving worldwide. And when I work over with the refugees in Spain, you know, and I hear those stories of how those little SD chips that you heard about this morning going out with the Jesus film to a place in Iraq, and Mosul is under attack, and these are going out with people who are hidden in the mountains in their tents, and they put those little SD chips in their phone, and within a few days when the bullets stop flying, they come down and say, who can tell us about this Jesus? We saw him in our tent before we saw it on the screen. And I was saying to Ron last night, I said, I hear that story over and over again. Jesus keeps appearing to people. And then we come along with technology and they say, oh yeah, that's the same guy that was in my tent. And then people say, and they say to you too, Brett, when are you going to retire? And I say, how can I when it's getting so good? When you see people coming to Christ like you've never seen before, like we did in Honduras, how can you say, well, I'm just going to sit down and read a book and rock in a rocking chair? And I thank you, Ron, for taking me on those trips and giving me the opportunity to see what you saw. And in my own way, I said to the Lord, you do that with me, and I'll die a happy man. So thank you for this opportunity of being here to share what God has done in my life, but also to hear all of yours. It's so encouraging, every one of you, when you tell us what God has done for you. So thank you.
Anyone else in row 3? Row 4. Good, Bob, come ahead.
Some of you folks won't know me because I was always positioned here, but I first ran into HCJB in the 1950s as a little boy whose pastor gave a sermon about Seek You God. He was a ham radio operator. And soon after that, he showed me his equipment, Heathkit stuff. He was built it all, kits. I wanted to do that. And he said, well, learn the code. So I learned the code. 2 weeks later, he said, did you study? Oh, yes. I don't believe it. Tapped out some Morse code. He said, yeah, you got it. You know, I wrote down what he said. He said, well, but I could never do it under pressure. He said, you just did it. I could give you a volunteer exam, and you'll get your novice license. And then I built my Heathkits. And neighbors helped me put up antennas. And then Sputnik came over soon after that. And I realized we had a global war coming. So as I went on through school, college, I went to a Christian prep school, I think, at no cost. My mom was alone. She wanted to be the secretary. They didn't need a secretary, but they saw me and wanted me. So, 7,000 memory verses over those 4 years at Stony Brook School, Long Island. In college, I studied Russian because I saw the Cold War coming. I was the leader, president of the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Watched a revival in high school. Wanted to see more of that in college. Didn't get to see it in the secular college, University of Rochester. Graduate was in physics. But every one of these steps, and the reason I'm telling you these steps is, God was preparing me. Every one of these things prepared me for the next thing, Wings was going to be running in Russian. New Life is still there in Russia. I assume running Wings, I don't know. The ministry that was a satellite uplink for the Russian-speaking people, the automation system had to speak Russian. Somebody needed to know it. It could write software. I had 20 years in industry. We were, I thought it was the best job in the world. We were doing the #1 vendor of fab equipment for integrated circuits. So I was sometimes inside the fab rooms where they made the integrated circuits. I became director of research at the corporation, a $500 million company. Came here thinking that our church would support us, and then we found out that they were a young church and didn't know what missions meant, mission support. And we said, well, that's easy. We'll come, we will get turned down on our mortgage. We had 6 little boys. Nobody's going to rent a house to 6 boys. So we had to buy a house here. We still had a house there. We had tenants. It was self-supporting. So it was an up-down duplex. When they heard out what we had done, they left, broke their lease. So now we had 2 mortgages and no rent coming in, and no salary, and no church support. And so we said, oh, this is easy. I read about Abraham. He went up the mountain, but he came back down with his son. God provided the ram. Well, in tears here, in Goshen, just a few miles from here, 3 o'clock in the morning, Lord, how are you going to feed my family? What's going to happen here? I was so frightened. I need 2 evidences you're going to take care of us, Lord. 2. Gideon got 2, I want 2. 7 o'clock in the morning, the teller from the little branch bank shows up. She'd just seen me open a checking account. That's all she knew. She had made a pot of bean stew and a sheet of cornbread to welcome us into the community and tell us that God would take care of us. The bank that gave us the mortgage said, well, his credit is almost perfect. He'll be good for it. He'll fail, but he'll ultimately be good for the mortgage. He needs to learn a lesson about stepping out in faith. Well, the lesson was, in a year we sold the house in New York for twice what we paid for it, and brought in a check for the rest of the mortgage and paid it off. That's how God provided. The company that I was with, appreciative of all the work I'd done there, gave me a year's salary after that year as severance pay. That paid up all the debt we'd accumulated while we were here. And God has continued to provide. Our 6 kids have grown up in the Lord. They travel all over the world. They think nothing of national boundaries because all their friends were missionary kids. I think the greatest privilege was to go into Russia and put in the studio uplink support for Wings. And to see a place that I'd watched the tanks run over back in the 1950s. And the missiles and the Sputnik and all that. And to go to Romania and teach the pastors how to run their own radio stations one at a time across a dozen cities of Romania in a environment where others came in to a classroom situation and we taught it again there. And then came back here, did a small amount. I did the modulator on the HC100 too. As I arrived, a fellow, I believe it was Rick Riggs, was about to leave, and he had done the software design and hardware design, and had never been power put to it. And he was there for a week. And then I got it. And God knew. He knew just what would be needed and who would be needed and what skills they would need. And those were the kinds of things I'd done in industry for 20 years. So my message is really God has his hand in this in a way that is hard to appreciate. It's so extensive that it goes back in the 1950s and all the way back to the 1930s really, and it will continue. He's continued to provide for us. A quick note about what we do now is we've helped somewhere around 1,400 Christian stations come on, or at least file with the FCC in the U.S., because the U.S. church is dying. Our culture here, which used to be a robust Christian culture back when I was a little boy, is dying. It's very sick. And so Christian radio in the U.S. is happening. We put the first Christian outlet in Boston about 2 months ago, on top of the Hancock Tower. We have another one on top of the Sears Tower in Chicago. 100,000 watts at 2,000 feet above Dallas. The only station that reaches both San Diego and Los Angeles on that Palomar. There's just a few. There's a lot of stories. That's things I learned from Herb. Herb taught me how to do that, how to think it through. And the FCC is pretty much shutting us down. Jim said many years ago that we were becoming a closed country for Christian radio. And he was right. They've tried desperately to stop us. And God keeps making a way. He's providing a little footnote that creates another 200 stations. And the FCC says, you're cheating. You get all the wins on this. Well, no, I read your rules and nobody else did. They think that something can't be done. They make a rule that nobody can compute. They called me up and said, this is wrong on one of them. I said, well, no, it's not. I read your rule. It's exactly what the rule says. No, our legal people and our engineering people agree it can't be done, so it can't be possible. You're right. What kind of rule is that? I read it. It didn't seem impossible to me, and I just did it. God has his ways of breaking past these barriers, whether they're personal, whether they're ministry. And we have to remember that it's really his work that we're seeing here, and not ours. And if we ever take credit for it, it'll end. We have to give it always back to him. So that's all I had. The 6 boys grew up. We made it through the college debt. I've got just a few $1,000s to go, finally. We had a little girl after we got here. Her name is Joy Forever, and our last name Moore. I'm Bob Moore. So she's Joy Forevermore. And she's every bit that. She's now married. So on the personal side, Juanita would be here, but she's getting tired, and it's hard for her. So she was here last night, and she was so exuberant and enthusiastic that she wore herself out. I hope to see her again tonight. So that's the story of the Moors. God has been very good, and the opportunities to share and to touch shoulders with these giants that you've heard about, both the Clarences all the way through the current time, has been something that I will always treasure. And thank you. Lord bless you.
During my time with World Radio Network along the border, I worked a lot with Bob. And he was talking about putting up stations. What he was meaning there is to make a technical application for the use of that frequency in that city with this much power at this high above the ground. And you have to jump through all those hoops before the FCC will, and you have to do it right. Never did we ever have an application that Bob submitted for us to the FCC that was bounced off because of some technical flaw. My favorite story about him was we had just got up to Texas from Quito, and Ben Cummings had applied for a lot of stations all along the U.S.-Mexico border. That was a really important visionary thing to do, because the ability to apply for those very quickly evaporated in the next few years. One station in particular was in Yuma, Arizona, right on the border with the United States and Mexico and California. They're right down there. And the application was for a powerful station, 100,000 watts, and as it was time to build it, and I was involved then with seeing that get done, and the radio station whose tower we were going to co-locate on, they decided not to let us do it. They said, we were wrong, it's not a strong enough tower to hold all your antennas and ours, you can't use that site. Now, Yuma has an interesting thing, and it's called crop dusters rule the world. And so you can't hardly get permission from the county or city to put up a tower that the crop dusters guys don't like. And so there were no place to go. And I talked to Bob, and he said, let me look at this. And he looked around, and he noticed that all of the FM and television stations for Yuma were not down in the valley where we had applied originally, but it was up on this mountain, actually over in California a little bit, called Black Mountain, and that's where everybody was. and Bob began to use his programs and things, and he figured out that we could apply and move to that place. And here's what happened. We went from needing a 20,000 watt transmitter to one of only 3,000 watts. We covered this big of an area, and we suddenly now would cover this big of an area. Just a wonderful win, 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 win. And we applied for that, and we got that, and so KRUM is covering way over into California. It covers, of course, Yuma, fine. And it really is a relatively economical station. It has a small transmitter and covers a gigantic area because it's stuck underneath that mountain. God stuck that mountain up, and we were able to go on that mountain. So hats off to you, sir. That was just this whole series of wonderful things that I worked with Bob Moore on in regards to the World Radio Network and getting licenses that were becoming scarcer and scarcer. This table. You, Bob, was there anybody else on this table who'd like to share? Yes, please. Okay. Ron, tell me what it's done. Coming pretty. Thank you.
Probably not everybody here knows me, although I know a lot of the people here. And unlike most of the people here, I never was actually on the HCJB staff, but I was a working visitor several times, and I also came down to do projects with work groups, and 6 times in all, during which I visited either HCJB, and one of the visits was to Spain for the radio station that they were affiliated with there. And anyway, just want to start, it's a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege that I was invited to this group, even though I never technically was part of the staff, but I got to know a lot of excellent people, and HCJB, from the first time that I met anybody here, I was just so impressed with it, and it's part of the reason that I went down several times over again afterwards, after the first visit. My first visit was with a local church that I belonged to, and what they were doing was just 2-week summer mission trips, and we were sort of given a little exposure to a mission agency or an organization. We did some work painting and digging and that sort of thing at Camp Nueva Vida in Ecuador, and I had my first visit to HCJB during that trip. It was just a 1 afternoon visit, which was way too short, but I was impressed already just with that visit. So in 1989, I applied for a working visitor situation and went down for a month to help Jim Childs work on the microwave system at that time. Met John Beck and Jim and a whole bunch of other people, and I was just so impressed with the whole organization, what they've done, the people, and I just want to say thank you for the, it's been, all those 6 trips were high points in my life. Just, I'm glad to be here.
Amen.
Thanks for the invitation.
Amen.
Almost?
But you may, oh, I did say that, didn't I? It wasn't very, that wasn't communicating well at all.
No,
We did that well at HCJB. We didn't always communicate.
We can talk to the world, but not each other.
Well, would you talk to us and the Lord?
It's been a good day, hasn't it? Several things. One, looking around this room is just, what a joy. I mean, I got to work with all of you, but not work with you. I got to watch you work. And today, I got to hear what you had to do to make that stuff work. And it makes me even more appreciative of you. Secondly, I am impressed that God seems to have a pattern here. Last night I talked about Him providing for our needs, but it isn't only financial. He has provided people right when we needed them, whether working visitors or missionaries. Just people calling up saying, hey, I heard about you and wondered if we could talk. And suddenly they're on a staff and they have the skill. I remember that bench in Camp of the Woods talking to you, Bob. I didn't know what you could do. I just knew you could have kids. Did that well. But I mean, isn't it amazing what God has done for this organization? So let's give him thanks. Father, this has been good. And we want to clarify if there's any question that all the praise goes to you. Anything we've been able to do, any piece of equipment we've been able to provide, any person that has decided to walk with you is because of you. And we count it such a deep privilege that you would let us have any part in that journey. So thank you. I want to thank you for the joy of these people just standing up to take that picture. Oh, what memories of so many times standing with them to take pictures, and to seeing them in meetings and working and socially and in church and in schools, in the bleachers. Lord, thank you for friends that we will have for all of eternity. And thank you for a bit of that here this weekend. So Lord, we just want to say thank you for your goodness to us, for your blessings in our lives, and for letting us know each other. Thank you, in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, did you want to say something?